Good evening, colleagues.
Good evening, Mr. Chair.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. Yes.
Apologies for my tardiness. We're having some technical difficulties here at City Hall, but they are resolved as they can be. So I will call this meeting to order. I've got my gavel and everything for the first time in a long time, so that's exciting. And I will read the notice. Board of Alders Notice, New Haven. The Legislation Committee of the Board of Alders will meet on Tuesday, August 3rd, 2021 at 6:00 p.m. in person, is what the notice says, and the Board of Alders chamber located at 165 Church Street, second floor, New Haven, Connecticut, to hear and act on the following items. 1, OR 2021-0014, zoning ordinance text for accessory dwelling units in RM1, RM2, RS1, and RS2 zones, and reducing minimum lot size to 4,000 square feet. And 2, OR 2021-0016, ordinance text and map amendment to the New Haven zoning ordinance to require and incentivize the inclusion of affordable housing units in market rate development. Per order, Honorable Charles Decker, Chair, attest Honorable Michael Smart, City Clerk. These items are on file and available at the office of the City Clerk, room 202 at 200 Orange Street, New Haven, CT 06510. For accessibility of related accommodations, please call 203-946-7651 voice or 203-946-8582 TTY TDD. Public comment/testimony also may be submitted via email to publictestimony@newhavenct.gov before 2:00 p.m. on the day of the meeting. Good evening, colleagues. Before I ask you to introduce yourselves, I will just say, I think everyone on the committee knows this, but in fact, tonight, we're only actually going to be opening the public hearing for item 1, the ADU. I believe that the ADU item and the inclusionary zoning item are both, potentially consequential enough that they each deserve their own hearing, and I don't want to try to pack them all in one night. So again, I think everyone knew that, but in case there are members of the public who did not, we're only going to be hearing item 1 about the accessory dwelling units tonight. Inclusionary zoning will be at a future date. So I will now call the roll with my handy printed roll sheet. Decker, Chair, he is here. Furlow. Alder Furlow, I know, is not with us this evening. Alder Ferrara Santana.
I'm here.
Welcome, ma'am. Alder Douglas.
Yes, I'm here.
Welcome. Alder Morrison.
Here.
Alder Marchand.
Here.
And Alder Brackeen.
Present.
Welcome, members of this committee. I would also like to recognize members of the Board of Alders who are not on this committee, but who have joined us this evening, including Alder Kimberly Edwards from the 19th. We have Alder Ross from the 7th. We have a double dose of Alder Carmen Rodriguez from Ward 6. I'm just going to click onto the participants to make sure that we don't have any others, and I do not see anyone. So with that, as I said, we will move to item 1, OR 2021-0014. And I saw Director Woods. There's Aisha, who I believe will be giving us a presentation. You have the floor.
Great. Well, I just wanted to say it is my great honor and pleasure to be here before you tonight, introducing this piece of legislation. I have a short presentation, which I will just go ahead and jump into, and then leaving plenty of time for questions, which I'm sure you will have a lot of. So I will share my screen. Let's see. Can everybody see my screen?
Indeed.
Yes. Okay, great. So again, I'm very grateful to be here tonight and to share with you the proposal for accessory dwelling units and also reducing minimum lot size. Okay, I am sorry, I'm just on the wrong page here. Okay. The proposed legislation is part of a larger platform to address the affordable housing crisis in New Haven. It supports the Board of Alders legislative agenda policy goal of safe, affordable housing and builds on the recommendations of the Affordable Housing Task Force. The accessory dwelling unit proposal here is also aligned with House Bill 6107, which was passed by the Connecticut General Assembly and signed by Governor Lamont in June 2021, largely supported by Desegregate CT and the Connecticut, and it is also aligned with platforms supported by the CT Fair Housing Center. This slide just shows how, as part of the overall Housing for All plan, we recognize that zoning reform is just one part of it. It will not address the entire affordable housing crisis, but it is in step with the affordable housing production programs and also with initiatives to support residents and avoid displacement. So what City Plan has really been focusing on is the small scale zoning reform, which is what you're hearing tonight. And then at a future night, you will be hearing more about the market rate inclusionary zoning. In recent years, the City of New Haven has seen robust growth of large-scale market rate development, but there's still a strong demand for affordable housing options in all New Haven neighborhoods, and particularly ones that build equity within New Haven for New Haven residents. As in most other US cities, outdated zoning built on redlining has created restrictions and barriers to small-scale and incremental and affordable development across the city. And the primary instruments of this in zoning are lot size, parking requirements, and density restrictions. This has historically limited housing choice for residents of limited economic means and reinforced racial segregation and wealth gaps. Zoning matters, I think, all across the country in light of inequities that have really been amplified over the past year and a half. There is a broad recognition that zoning, that the history of zoning needs to be really examined and that barriers need to be reduced. So zoning determines where housing can be built, the type of housing, and the form it takes, and it has a great impact on the cost of developing housing. Exclusionary zoning includes regulations regarding housing types, minimum lot size, parking requirements, and density that generally reduce housing choices and opportunities. And this need to reform our zoning has been recognized at the national level by the Biden administration. It's also was very much the topic of a robust discussion around House Bill 6107 that I mentioned earlier. And it's been supported, or rather I should say our report leans heavily also on the Regional Plan Association's Be My Neighbor report, as well as the Yale Law Clinic Preventing Displacement report that was done in the spring of 2020. So the goals of the accessory dwelling unit are to increase affordable housing choices, especially for residents of all income levels, including very low income residents. It's to provide housing, a flexible housing type that responds to changing family needs, smaller households, and increasing housing costs. It can provide accessible housing for seniors and persons with disabilities. It can create new housing units while respecting the scale of a historic fabric and traditional types of development. It also very much fits in with a climate-friendly agenda. It supports more efficient use of existing housing stock and infrastructure. So rather than tearing down, it proposes small-scale improvements to our existing housing stock. It offers environmentally friendly housing choices that are smaller, more compact, less carbon footprints. The other thing this program, or rather this type of development encourages, is creating small contractor workforce opportunities. And it will also bring illegal rental units into compliance. We see a number of ADUs going through our BZA process every month. And it's not difficult for a large landlord to do that, but it is a great burden on homeowners, especially ones of limited means. So I'll just start by introducing the general topic of accessory dwelling units, and then go more specifically into what the zoning text changes that are before you tonight entail. So very broadly, there's different types of accessory dwelling units. They can be in a third floor. This is a very common type in New Haven, houses that are two families but have a partially unfinished third floor that could easily be converted into a comfortable apartment. Some houses have adequate basement height levels that could also be converted. Other types of ADUs that are not part of this phase 1 legislation, but adding an addition to a house or building a detached standalone ADU on the same parcel. So those are basically the three different types of ADUs. Our housing stock in New Haven is largely it's largely in the small scale category of single family to 3 to 4 units. And so we see this as having, potential to be an effective tool to create more affordable housing units. We're proposing a very slow rollout of this. So the initial phase that we're proposing, and that's in the text before you, would allow one additional unit within the envelope of an existing primary structure. It would also allow a conversion of an existing accessory detached unit. So if there was a carriage house or a garage type building that met, the basic code requirements, it would also allow that to be converted. In this first phase, we are including an owner occupancy requirement, and it also waives additional parking requirements. So this is the basic concept of what is in the actual text change before you. Future updates, and then again, this would come before you and be vetted by you, could include, a standalone detached ADU, a more liberal interpretation of adding an addition as an ADU. We could relook at the owner occupancy requirement if we felt like there was a good strategy or good evidence that it wouldn't lead to speculation, which has been which has been a recurring concern. So these are things to think about for the future, but they're not included in this legislation before you. Various other municipalities have taken a similar path where they start with a fairly limited ADU allowance and then have looked at various ways to increase the production of ADUs by lifting additional restrictions. Part of the reason for keeping it within the existing envelope right now is because our current bulk zoning is mismatched with our existing fabric, and we need to spend some time really looking at revising other parts of the zoning code, such as setbacks, that would, and also develop some design guidelines accordingly. I'll just take you through a couple examples. ADUs are very much, a traditional part of development in the city. Right now, they were just, barriers. There's existing barriers within our zoning code right now, but they've been traditionally a part of, small scale development. So here's an example of a dwelling unit above a garage. Here's an example of, somebody who probably well in the past lifted the house to add a dwelling unit in the basement. Here's an example of a detached ADU, and this would not be allowed as of right under the current legislation, but I just wanted to show how this is a pattern of development within the city, or has been a pattern of development. This is another ADU that is kind of tucked into the back behind this little house. So the other really important part of this proposed text change is to reduce the minimum lot size. So minimum lot sizes have been used, throughout the last century, really to enforce segregation and limit housing opportunities. The other, and by driving up costs. So the other reason to reduce the minimum lot size is also to make sliver lots, which are perfectly buildable within the existing neighborhood fabric, buildable by right. So there's a whole category of sliver lots that currently are deemed non-buildable because they're below a certain size. So again, the next steps are, encourage public input, especially as we move into design standards, which may be specific to neighborhoods. Establish a timeline and target goals for additional text changes. So again, this would go through consider this an evolving legislation. We would come back, in the future once we have some design guidelines developed. We also think there's a programmatic piece to this that's would be really important and really helpful, especially with reaching low income homeowners. So to look at incentives and partnerships for deeply affordable accessory dwelling units. This is again on the programmatic side, so we haven't addressed this in the zoning text right now, but it is programs that are in, sort of early concept development at the city. Also linking more specifically to small contractor and workforce development programs. And then again, really monitoring and evaluating and being sensitive to resident input about the program. So with that, I will stop the screen sharing and I am happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Director Woods. I'd also like to acknowledge our colleague who is not on this committee, but is our colleague on the board, Alder Stephen Winter, who has joined us. And I believe I saw Alder Sabin as well, but I do not see him now. And Director Woods, I'm sorry if I forgot, but did you give your name and address for the record up top?
I am sorry, I forgot that too. I should know better. Aisha Woods, 42 Cantor Street.
Okay, thank you for that. And with that, I will ask committee members if they have any questions for Director Woods. I see and recognize Alder Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Aisha, so in regards to all these dwellings that you've identified throughout the city, have people, what has happened to those people? Was there anything that happened, or is this something that just continues to happen throughout the city? In a sense, there's no real control. Whereas with this text amendment, it sounds like you're trying to get a more uniform control method around what those type of ADUs, I'm sorry, ADUs
Yeah.
that should happen in the city?
So that's a great question. The ones that the examples that I showed were more to show typology, and I didn't want to put any specific homeowners on the spot by
Right.
investigating each one of those. But what we do see is through our Board of Zoning Appeals, every month there's around 4 or 5 applications to add an additional dwelling unit. And again, if it's a larger landlord, it's and they have a lawyer to help facilitate that, it's not a big deal. But if it's a homeowner, it can be pretty challenging to do that. So this would create a clear and transparent pathway. It would reduce some of the burden on, it would reduce specifically the burden on homeowners who wanted to, take advantage of having that second income stream and adding to their houses. And then I think in future phases, as we're really, unpacking our zoning code and developing design guidelines, that would put more, it would help streamline, the process as well. Yeah.
Right, right. Well, I thank you for having the little guy in mind. A lot of times when you're looking at structure, the infrastructure of city government, the big focus is always on the big guy with the lawyers, with the money, but everyone wants to make money. And so I'm happy to see that through this text change, it will open up more opportunity for all residents in New Haven. So thank you. Nothing further, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Morrison. Do other members of this committee have questions for Director Woods? I recognize Alderman Marchand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank Director Woods for her presentation. I want to ask some questions mainly to assist Director Woods in making clear all the components of the actual text change before us. Her presentation was very helpful, but I didn't see a concise listing of the actual changes, which I think was elsewhere in our packet, but it's useful for the public to hear what actually is changed. And so the first one is this text amendment would allow ADUs as of right in certain residential zones. Would you say more about why you chose the particular zones where these would be allowed as of right?
Sure. Thank you very much. That is an excellent question as well. So this would apply to our residential zones. We have the RM1 and RM2, which are sort of medium density residential zones that are closer to downtown. And then it also applies to RS1 and RS2, which are single family zones, which are primarily Westville and then Prospect Hill and East Shore. In our next phase, there's lots of other housing that's blended into our other zones. But right now, the way the zoning ordinance is set up, it has very specific descriptions for those residential zones. And so we're proposing the text changes to those specific zones. And they also make up the vast majority of our residential areas. I think in a future phase, and this was brought up, this was suggested on a number of fronts, is to really look at how this could benefit also some of our in-between zones or housing that is in our industrial zones. So, there's there's scenarios where this could be expanded, but right now the sort of cleanest way to do it in the zoning ordinance was to really focus on our residential zones.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. The next change that I think is worth highlighting is that this text amendment would not require an additional parking space in a property where a dwelling unit was added through the conversion of some space into an ADU. And you want to say a little bit more about the decision not to require additional space, parking space be provided?
Sure. So that's probably the most common type of relief that's requested at the Board of Zoning Appeals. And then it's currently, and then that is forwarded to City Plan Commission. And then it goes back to Board of Zoning Appeals. So just in terms of process, again, it is streamlining the process. So homeowners wouldn't have to go through that back and forth. But the broader, so much of our residential zones were built before cars were common for, everybody to have a car. And so if you imagine requiring driveways and additional paved surface in people's backyards, it just adds a lot of real estate that's dedicated to cars that otherwise could be green space or housing footprints. So in a way, it's really a question of, prioritizing the land use for housing over land use for cars when it isn't, when we're talking about the private parcel. There are concerns about parking, and we did, spend some time with the Hill South residents, both in meetings and walking around in the neighborhood. And the parking issue is really almost a block by block issue in the city. And we have some existing tools such as the residential parking zone to address the parking, to address issues if a block, has sort of a surplus of cars on it. But I kind of, and I really, really appreciate, the time spent and appreciate the concerns people have about parking on their block, on their specific blocks. I want to, I want to reframe it a little bit, and this is not at all to diminish anybody's concerns about, their experience with parking on their block. But again, we really have to think about if we're prioritizing land use towards housing and green space versus prioritizing it for car storage. And we also, the parking problem is really a transportation problem. And so, I would encourage the Board of Alders to task, city staff with really doing both a comprehensive parking study to really look at, understand the numbers behind it, but also, really to prioritize land use that allows people to live close to where they work, that reduces our dependency on cars. So from a broader policy perspective, I just want to emphasize that part with regards to the parking.
Thank you, Director Woods. I have two more points, and then you can tell me if I missed anything. The third is the minimum lot size. Could you just say one more time the proposal to reduce it to what from what?
Okay, so the proposal, so in our single family zones, we have a very large minimum lot size, up to, 7,500 square feet per, for a single family unit. Also, there's another detail that's in there, which is the lot frontage. because we reduced it also in the single family zones, there's a very large lot frontage. We reduced the lot frontage accordingly to about 50 feet because that's still a 4,000 square foot lot is still a generous lot. It's not a tiny lot. It's a very average lot that you might find a 3-family house on. And the 50-foot frontage is also very typical type of dimension for our RM1 and RM2 zones.
Just so that folks understand, the proposal in the text amendment, the way the text amendment reads is that it reduces the size of the minimum size of a lot in a residential zone to 4,000 square feet, which is, and then it also reduces how much yard should be in the front to 50 feet between the property line and the tree belt. Can you just explain exactly what that measurement means?
The 50 feet would be between abutting lots. So right now, the size of the lot is regulated both by the lot size and the length of the street frontage. And 50 feet is still very generous. I mean, it's really, we have many neighborhoods that are much smaller than that, are much, have smaller lot frontages and smaller lot sizes. But the 4,000, in doing an analysis, that's a very common lot type in the, sort of in the traditional development of our neighborhoods.
So just to speak in layman's terms, the 50-foot minimum lot frontage is really, when you're looking straight on towards the property from the street, the property has to be at least 50 feet wide from one neighbor on one side to the other neighbor on the other. That's the lot frontage.
That's the lot frontage, exactly.
And so if you had a 4,000 square foot property with exactly a 50-foot frontage, it could be 50 by 80 feet, and that would get you your 4,000 square feet. Is that right?
Yep, that's correct.
I believe that's bigger than my property. Anyway,
it's been, there may be some who say that's too big, but we wanted to start with something that, didn't create like a dramatic change, but was like very much in fitting with the average, very common lot size. And this doesn't mean that, this would only happen, it's really to benefit primarily sliver lots, which are deemed too small for a, for a buildable lot.
Director Woods, my last question is, could you say a few words about the ownership occupancy requirement that's built into this zoning text amendment? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure. So a lot of feedback we got were concerns about, speculative landlords sort of taking advantage of this ADU policy that, and those, in a city with a very high, absentee owner rate, that's very understandable that would be a concern. In other cities, it hasn't borne out when they removed the owner occupancy requirement that, there was a rash of speculation around this. It's really, it's a very intentional investment to build an ADU. And so it's, it's primarily owner occupancy driven, but we're comfortable, having that owner occupancy requirement for now, just to, to allay those concerns about speculation. So it would require the deed holder to be resident in the property. And there would be something put on the land records that requires that, if the house were sold, it would have to be an owner occupant.
Thank you, Director Woods. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alder Marchand. Other members of the committee with questions? I saw Alder Douglas's hand before. Do you have a question still, sir?
Well, no, I think Alder Marchand answered that question. Well, had Ms. Woods answered that question, but I do have a concern. How does this affect the larger developments, like the larger apartment buildings? Does this lessen their restrictions at all
No,
as
this,
far as zoning goes?
thank you. That's a great question. It does not. This really just applies currently to 1 to 4 family houses and for owner occupants. So it wouldn't benefit, a developer that was doing a larger multifamily. We have gotten some pushback on the owner occupancy requirement with regards to nonprofits who provide, who do some of the small scale development, but that's something that we would have to, take another look at.
Yeah, that should be carved out of there. All right, thank you. You answered my question. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alder Douglas. Other questions from members of the committee? I have a question. So you've mentioned several times that this is phase 1 of a potential multi-phase project, which I think is appropriate. My question is, could you say a little bit more about when you're evaluating phase 1, what are you looking for? How would you define success? And I'm also particularly interested in the scale of ADU development that you're anticipating. I heard you say that you're not expecting a rash of speculation based on what other municipalities have experienced, but I would be curious to hear a little bit more about what you are looking for or anticipating for your evaluation.
Sure, thank you for your question. So I think success is that success would be, happy homeowners that are able to, provide this additional living space as, for additional income stream. It's also, very often been used for families who have adult children or an aging parent, that they want to provide an independent living space for. So those are really, those are some of the most common scenarios for accessory dwelling units. We looked at a lot of other cities, and other jurisdictions around the country, and typically, the adoption rate it's not, a sudden rush of ADUs. It's typically, and I don't know how to quantify it exactly. As I don't know how to quantify it exactly, like I can't predict, exactly how many more applications we would see, but let's say we have 5 applications a month, and maybe 3 of those are homeowners. If we could, double that, because there were some barriers that discouraged some homeowners from doing it, I think that would be a great start. And then I would like to see some more programmatic supports for people to do this, because if your house is, if your house is already a little bit underwater or you have credit problems, then it will be challenging to get a construction loan to do an ADU. So we'd like to develop some programmatic supports for that.
Thank you for that answer. So to extrapolate from what you're saying, would it be fair to say that you think it's likelier that we would see over the course of, say, the first year, dozens of applications rather than hundreds, or rather than like 2?
Yes, I think it would start slow.
Okay, thank you for that. That's helpful clarity for me. I have no further questions beyond that. Last call for members of the committee to ask questions of Director Woods. Seeing none, I will now ask for public testimony. I also have, we as the committee have received quite a bit of written testimony, and I will just characterize that at the end of public testimony as well. But I know that we do have some members of the public who have joined us to testify tonight. So I see we have Anstrus Farwell has joined us in the room. So Anstrus, when you are ready, you may go ahead. Is Anstrus with us? Perhaps not yet.
Hello there.
There we are. Name and address for the record, please.
Yes, this is Anstrus Farwell at 37 Worcester Place. I'm with the New Haven Urban Design League. I dropped a few questions into the Q&A. And maybe if you would like, I'm happy just to leave those questions there. And if at the end of your public testimony, there may be a couple of questions, and if you'd like to answer them all at once, that's fine. They're really about process for this. But I'd like to just say a few things. One, I'm really glad to see this initiative moving forward. The New Haven Urban Design League has been a long advocate of ADUs, and they can be significant help to property owners that need some financial assistance to keep a home or to buy a home. And it's a way of opening up opportunity for both renters and homeowners. It might to help more people become homeowners. So I think that this is a enormous and welcome step forward. I think that I have two concerns. One is I think it's very important that the parking reduction remain as of right, and that people would not be required to get a special exception for parking. If someone, a small property owner needed to hire a lawyer to go to BZA to take that step on top of the other costs, building permits and possibly a designer and all of that, it could be just enough to be a barrier to what could actually be a very simple project to convert an attic or something. So if this is a first step and you're testing it in a small way, I think it's all the more reasonable, in fact, to make sure that this can go forward without subjecting people to the special exception for parking. I appreciate the concern of many people have had about this issue. And I think I'd be interested to know if the city has studied the areas that are particularly parking distressed. About, for instance, the typical lot sizes. I suspect that in most of those places, the lot sizes wouldn't allow an accessory dwelling unit anyway. They're already below the 4,000, way below the 4,000. So I think that they are already completely protected from additional units in this first phase. And other than that, my concern about basement conversions continues. I've seen them all over the city. Many are put in illegally, some of them not with permits, but they may have met the requirements, let's say, for fire egress and ventilation in the basement. But you can see there's still light-starved areas, and often in basements of historic buildings with brick or rubble stone or mason or, stone block foundations that are going to naturally have a lot of rising damp and moisture. And I'm very concerned about health of people that would live in these places. And I don't think that our building code is sufficient to provide protections there. And I think maybe just like the design guidelines, before this is let out to accelerate, it could be that we really need to update the building code specifically about requirements for basement units. We all know so much more now than we did, even 10 years ago, about the impact of environment on illnesses like asthma, which is so common with adults and particularly children. And we don't want to create places that make people that are already struggling with other issues struggle with more. So that is what I have to share with you. And I really appreciate the good work that has been done on this. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Farwell. Before I ask members of the committee if they have any questions, I would just like to give a quick reminder on the procedure here, which is that members of the public are here to give, public testimony. At the end of the public testimony, before we will entertain motions, I'll ask Director Woods if she has anything to add based on what she's heard, but this is not a Q&A of the city plan director at this point. So I just want to make sure that everybody remembers that. So actually, Ms. Farwell, if you had other questions that you wanted to raise as public testimony, you may, because the Q&A is not, the Q&A function is not going to be used for that.
I think that would be it. And sometimes in public hearings, there's a section of the hearing where just for information purposes, you can ask a question. So the questions I've asked are in that spirit.
Understood. And I meant no aggression.
Yes, I understand too. Yeah, but we're all trying to make sure we understand things as best as possible. And because this is in a way a first step in a test, sharing ideas, not just concerns, is something that there's room, and I appreciate that very much.
Absolutely, and this committee greatly appreciates your wealth of knowledge and expertise and experience in all of these issues. And so with that, I will ask colleagues, any questions for Ms. Farwell? Seeing none, we thank you, and we'll have our next member of the public. Mr. Carlson, when you are ready, you may go ahead. Please give your name and address for the record. Mr. Carlson, are you with us? John Carlson appears not to be with us. Perhaps he'll join us later. So we'll put him back in the queue for now, and I will call Leora Trestman. Is that Leora or is that John?
I'm here.
Okay. Mr. Carlson, go ahead, and then Leora Trestman will be next.
So I had actually submitted my testimony via email, but I'm against the passage of this in its current form.
Mr. Carlson, can you just give us your name and address for the record first?
Oh, sorry, John Carlson, 291 Greenwich Avenue.
Thank you much. Go ahead.
So I'm against this passage in its current form. One size zoning does not work. The Hill neighborhood is already dense with homes very close together, and parking is very limited. There's not enough parking spaces as it is. Waiving the parking requirement will only increase the problem. Additionally, phase one calls for ADUs to be allowed in owner-occupied homes only. There's no such provision included in following phases. This is going to create the opportunity for slumlords to further subdivide houses into smaller apartments, which is also going to increase congestion, cause fire hazards, and create more parking issues for Hill residents. Lastly, Aisha has already stated in previous meetings that several variances are submitted every month and get approved every month for these types of apartments. So I see no need to pass this at this point in time based on the lack of parking, the dangerous conditions it will cause, and the fire hazards. But mostly because of parking. There is no parking in the Hill. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And the committee has received your written testimony as well, and that will be added to the public record in addition to your testimony tonight. Do committee members have any questions for Mr. Carlson? Seeing none, we thank you, and we will, I recognize Leor Trestman.
Thank you. My name is Leor Trestman, and I live at 396 Orange Street in New Haven. To ADUs, I mean, I don't have a terribly well thought out testimony, but the thoughts that I've put together previously and while listening, first of all, is that at the last American Rescue Plan meeting that the city held, the biggest issue that folks raised that they faced during and before the pandemic is the rent being too high. I personally had a roommate who became homeless because he could not find a place to live that was within the amount of money that he earned. He had a job, but he just didn't make enough money to pay rent. So increasing the housing stock, I also happen to have a friend who could have homed him in an extra room, but it wouldn't have been legal. So this is like a very clear issue. It's almost surprising to me that there's debate around it. As far as the parking, I think it's much more important to give people a place to live than having to walk a block or two to park your car and to get home. I don't think that parking should be prioritized over making sure that people are homed. 30% of households in New Haven don't own a car. So I don't know that is as big an issue as we think it is. As far as minimum lots, I am honestly not even sure why we have minimum lot sizes. I would love to hear that at some point. In Houston, Texas, where everything is bigger, their minimum lot size is 1,400 feet, far smaller than 4,000 square feet. So it goes without saying that I am in strong support of reducing the minimum lot size. I think the sliver lots we have around our city are embarrassing and an eyesore and could otherwise be used for housing, for a park. Frankly, I think the city should turn any sliver lots that they own and aren't going to use into parks for kids to use. And I would like to also lend my support to the points that Anstress Farwell made. I think that they were very good. You know, I think it will be challenging for our building department, well, even to do the job that they have before them now, but I am sure that we can rise to the task. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Mr. Trestman. Do any members of the committee have any questions for Mr. Trestman? Seeing none, thank you very much. And we will have our next member of the public. I see Jamie Myers McPhail. Jamie, when you are ready, please give us your name and address for the record and go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Jamie Myers McPhail. I live at 135 Bellevue Road. I'm an organizer with New Haven, a member of the Affordable Housing Commission. In New Haven Rising, we are fighting to change the maps of segregated development in our city. All of the low-income neighborhoods in New Haven today were marked declining or hazardous by the 1937 redlining maps. The map of home foreclosures after the Great Recession mirrors the map of COVID-19 infection rates today. Life expectancy in Newhallville is over 10 years shorter than neighboring Prospect Hill. In short, we have a crisis of segregation in our city that is unjust and is costing lives. Our city's affordable housing crisis is a main part of this crisis, and we must urgently address it. Allowing accessory dwelling units is one important tool our city can implement to ensure more residents have access to affordable, safe, and secure housing. 34% of New Haven's population spends more than half their incomes on housing. Residents across our city are stuck in unsafe housing with black mold, lead paint, and other disrepairs that can cause lifelong health challenges. Too many others have already been priced out or pushed out. This is a crisis that requires urgent action on multiple fronts, and we need every tool at our disposal. Fortunately, many cities have pioneered policies like easing ADU restrictions, and implementing inclusive zoning. These policies are already generating more affordable housing units in cities as wide-ranging as Chicago, Princeton, and Missoula, and states like California and Oregon. This is a common sense and increasingly common tool. Finally, it's worth noting that ADUs fell out of fashion in the 1950s with suburbanization and zoning restrictions. This was an era when zoning policy was designed to enforce racial segregation in our country and generate white flight from the cities. This is a time when the Oak Street neighborhood was destroyed to pave way for suburban commuters, an act that severed the hill from downtown. Easing restrictions on ADUs in New Haven could help desegregate our city. This would also be an important example for wealthy suburban communities that also need to dramatically change their zoning codes and facilitate a state with more opportunity and dignity for all residents. For working people like me who hope to remain in New Haven through various stages of my life, this proposal would make a big difference. I'm fortunate to own a home, but I pay over $6,200 in taxes, and $2,348 of that is just to subsidize Yale's tax break. I also have an older disabled mother who's low income, but can't get on any of the lengthy or closed wait lists for what little subsidized assisted living programs exist in our state. So being able to convert my garage into an apartment with her would keep her off the streets. And for many of my other aging neighbors, it could mean additional income that would enable them to remain in the community and also keep more of our homes out of the hands of predatory landlords and LLCs that are rapidly buying up swaths of the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Do members of the committee have any questions? Seeing none, we thank you. Who's next? I believe we have Rebecca Corbett will be joining us. And here comes Ms. Corbett.
Yes, give me a second. I'm trying to do all of this on my phone. I have a
Certainly.
testimony. Can you hear me?
We can, yes. Take your time getting set up.
Okay. Oh, this isn't going to work. Okay. All right. My name is Rebecca Corbett, and I live at 616 Winthrop Avenue. I am a member of the Affordable Housing Commission, and I'm here to testify in favor of allowing ADUs. Allowing ADUs is just smart. It provides more units of housing. It is good use of land in our city, and it will allow homeowners a chance to earn income. New Haven has an affordable housing crisis, and there's no easy answers. We have to work in multiple ways to generate more housing that is accessible to all of our residents. As a mother and a longtime New Haven resident, I know how important affordable housing is to families. When my sons were young, we were evicted from our apartment and became homeless. I want people to understand that when jobs are scarce and housing is as expensive as it is, families are just a paycheck away from being in our position. Our life changed when I became part of the New Haven Residents Training Program funded by Local 34. I was hired at Yale and able to provide a home for my children. Eventually, as a single working mother, I was even able to buy my own home. But will these opportunities be available for the next generation? One of my daughters can't find housing, affordable housing, for her and her two kids, even though she works full time. She's right on the line where she doesn't qualify for public assistance and also doesn't make enough to afford rent in New Haven. ADUs could provide more options for her and her family as they get their start. While folks like us have struggled to stay afloat, developers have come in and made fortunes building luxury condos and apartments, but regular homeowners aren't benefiting much from this development. Let's pass policies like allowing ADUs and help current homeowners and provide more housing for those who need it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Corbett. Do members, pardon me, do members of the committee have any questions? Seeing none, thank you again. And next we have Shanisha Jarrett.
Hi, my name is Shansia Jarrett, and I did not raise my hand to speak. I am just listening.
Fair enough, and apologies for mispronouncing your first name.
Not a problem.
All right, so we will have now, it appears, Mark Abraham.
Hi, this is Mark Abraham. I live at 11 Woodbridge Avenue in New Haven, Connecticut.
Go ahead.
And I'm just calling in to support the proposal to enable more ADUs. I think there's a definitely housing shortage in the city, and we need more units of all different sizes to sort of accommodate, the growing need for housing in the city. People are living longer, but even if the number of jobs in New Haven stays the same, as people live longer, more workers will need to come to New Haven to fill those jobs, and not just New Haven, but the surrounding area. So even if the number of jobs in New Haven stays the same, we're going to need increasing numbers of housing units for like the next several decades. And I think currently we're only producing about a third of the units we need. So we need both the large, apartments that have hundreds of units in them, and ADUs is just another tool for increasing the number of units that are out there, especially ones that might be more affordable to a typical family here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any questions for Mr. Abraham? Seeing none, do we have further members of the public? I don't have my participants list up. Mr. Abraham was the last person who had signed up, so I will call 3 times. First, are there any other members of the public who wish to be heard on this item? Are there any other members of the public who wish to be heard on this item? Are there any more members of the public who wish to be heard on this item? Before I'll entertain any motions, I will ask Director Woods if she would like to add anything based on testimony that we've heard tonight.
This is Aisha Woods. I wanted to thank everybody who came out to testify tonight, and also to those who submitted written testimony, as well as just, I really appreciate, all the conversations and feedback we've had on this matter, outside of public hearing. I would like to just address a couple of things that came up. I just want to be really clear that, any ADUs would be subject to building codes, so they would have the same, health and safety standards that any building project in New Haven would have. This is not proposing to reduce any of those requirements around, health, safety, building code, housing codes. Those would all certainly apply. So I just wanted, I heard some concerns about conditions or fire safety, and all of those, basic codes would apply to any ADU. So that wouldn't be waived. Nor would we have any legal recourse, that's in the state statute, in fact. I also wanted to address Mr. Trestman's comment about minimum lot sizes. And I agree with him, we're being conservative right now, but I think it's also appropriate to, do this policy in incremental steps, and we can certainly revisit, the minimum lot size in future iterations. And then I wanted to make one other point about the phasing. While we've talked about the broader vision for this, the actual text amendments before you tonight do not include those future, do not include the future phases right now. So we're really just, again, considering the minimum lot size of 4,000, adding 1 additional dwelling unit to 1 to 4 family houses, reducing parking requirements, and then there's an owner occupancy requirement. Another really important part of this is we're not we're allowing a +1 as of right within an existing envelope. So if you were to want to add another story to your house, or other ways really alter the footprint of the house or the shape of the house, you would still have to go to Board of Zoning Appeals if those alterations are not within the zoning code. So those are just some clarification, but again, thank you. There's been a really robust discussion on this topic, and so I really appreciate all the input.
Thank you again, Director Woods. I recognize Alder Marchand, who has his virtual hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted you to know that I received an email that was also sent to public testimony at newhavenct.gov, although it was sent very late, and it was from Elias Estabrook offering support. And also just reminds me that there were some letters submitted in advance that I believe you were going to summarize or somehow mention before we close the public hearing. But if it would please the chair, I could just briefly summarize the content of Mr. Estabrook's letter, which I note is not in the package of submitted testimony that we received just before the meeting.
You may go ahead, because I have a nice printed version, which I'm going to very quickly summarize after that. But Mr. Estabrook, who I know is another member of our Affordable Housing Commission, is not in there, so you can go ahead.
Right. So his testimony is just a few paragraphs. He's Elias Estabrook. He lives at 106 Newhall Street in New Haven. He's submitting testimony in support. He thinks it makes sense. He's read about the advantages of ADUs in other cities and towns, and he thinks those advantages would benefit the city of New Haven. He mentioned a study by the AARP about ADUs being a way for seniors to be able to develop rental options in their homes and be able to afford to stay in homes as they live in their retirement years. He's personally benefited from living in an affordable and very small dwelling unit prior to earlier in his time here in New Haven. He thinks young adults would benefit from having access to affordable rents in small rental units that could be created through this legislation. And so he concludes that he thinks the city should pass this ordinance. It will help people of all ages be able to have access to affordable units. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alder Marchand, for that summary and for the reminder about our submitted testimony. So I'm just going to extremely briefly go through the letters that I've received as chair. So we have one from Kristen Berendrecht Ludwig, who writes in favor. We have one from Mr. John Carlson, who, similar to his testimony tonight, is opposed. We have Donnell T. Hilton, who writes in favor. Both of the two favorable ones, by the way, the testimony is largely about increasing the amount of affordable housing. We have Elizabeth Esposito, who is writing in support about a nice mix of different sorts of housing in a city. Samantha Mashaw is in strong support, which is bolded, about rent prices. The next one is about the IZ item, which we'll hear next month. So we'll read that then. We have a letter from John McFadden, writing both as a developer and a resident in favor, talking about, again, the need for affordable housing and flexibility and housing options for people. We have Sam Sigg, who is in favor for affordable housing reasons. And Stephanie Upson, who is in favor about sustainability, and in particular about the reducing minimum lot size as well. So that's the packet that I received, plus Mr. Estabrook, which Alderman Marchand read. Alderman Marchand, I recognize you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate your calling on me again. I apologize for asking so many questions. This is for Director Woods. My colleague Alder Douglas brought up, seemed to respond to a point that you made about the owner occupancy requirement and whether or not there shouldn't be language that would allow nonprofits to meet that requirement. Right now, it doesn't read in a way that would, where a nonprofit would meet that requirement. And so I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about that. Is that something we should attempt to do before we, take a final vote on this item, or would that be a subsequent revision? Do you have any thoughts about that? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
This is Aisha. Thank you so much for elevating that question again. I would love for this to be extended to our nonprofits who are currently, serving residents who need affordable housing, many of whom, develop these small scale types of housing, and would be able to, connect those who need it the most with it. I'm pausing a little bit because I don't quite have the exact legal solution to it, but if it's something that, this committee recommended, we could certainly bring it back to council and see if there was something that we could add to the current text to allow that.
Thank you, Director Woods. Thank you, Alderman Marchand. I'm also wondering if were the committee wanting to move this forward tonight, that strikes me as an amendment that possibly could be done between the second reading and now, since I don't think it drastically changes the guts of the thing, but that's just sort of my thought off the top of my head, but we can discuss when we, if and when we move the item. So any further questions from members of this committee before I'll entertain a motion? I see no questions.
Mr. Chair, this is Alder Adam Marchand. I believe a member of the public has raised his hand.
Is that so? Indeed. Yes, I see now Mr. Philippi has his hand raised in the attendees. So if staff will promote him, we will hear that testimony. Mr. Philippi, you're in the room. If you're ready, you may go ahead. Give us your name and address for the record, please.
Yes, thank you for inviting me in. Dennis Sir Philippi, 223 Alden Avenue, New Haven, 06515. I just wanted to provide some public testimony. I was invited in as a panelist, it said, but I don't think I qualify as a panelist on the subject matter. But I would encourage the alders to try to promote some more awareness around this proposed legislation. I know, Adam, at the CMT meetings, I don't think we've heard anything about it. I'm sure that's probably the case in some of the other CMTs as well. My sense, just from posting online and in Nextdoor, is that not a lot of people know about it or are aware of it. And I think this legislation has the potential to change, the entire complexion of the city's housing market, maybe for better, maybe for worse, but I'm just not convinced that it's been thoroughly thought out. I do like the idea that one needs to be an owner occupant in order to qualify to build some of the ADUs. Having said that, I'm not sure what happens if somebody is an owner occupant when they build it and then they sell to somebody who's not an owner occupant? Do you remove the ADU from the housing inventory? And then I think there's a lot of other questions in terms of what it may cost the city. Do you need more LCI personnel to be able to inspect? Do you need more fire marshals in order to inspect? In terms of the health department, right? Some of these apartments that are going to be built in basements, which are not the best place to live from air quality perspective. Others may build in garages. I know most of the garages that I've come across in the city of New Haven are close to 100 years old, and there's not much in terms of the garages are basically at ground level, and some of them have maybe a lip of an inch or an inch and a half to prevent water from going in and out. So I think there's a lot of other issues involved here, although the intentions are well. I'm just not so sure it's been thoroughly thought out or thoroughly vetted with the public. And those are my comments.
Thank you, sir. Do any members of the committee have any questions,
Thank
Mr. Sirfilipi? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
for, I'm glad that we managed to get you in time.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I see no other members of the public, but before there's a motion, I did have one other thing to raise, which is I wonder if Director Woods or perhaps our City Plan Commission member on this committee could summarize what the CPC discussed or found on this item, since I know it was in front of them for multiple meetings.
Sure. Commissioner Marchand, I believe that you composed the final words on the report. Would you like to summarize on behalf?
Well, this is Alder Marchand. Let me try to remember what I said. Generally speaking, the commission was supportive, but had concerns around the parking issue. We heard a fair amount of testimony, particularly from residents on the Hill about the parking issue. So I believe we encouraged the board to think about that. I think the commission highlighted the issue around owner occupancy, which has also been discussed this evening. So the advice was generally favorable, but had some issues or concerns that it wanted to encourage the board to examine and think through. That's what I recall our report was.
And I concur. There also the concerns about, about health and safety were also raised by the board. But again, this isn't proposing any kind of waiver for any health and safety standards.
Thank you both. I think that's important context as well, since I know that the City Plan Commission works very hard on this item. So seeing no further members of the public and seeing no further questions, is there a motion that somebody would like to make?
Mr. Chair, this is Alder Marchand. I move that we close the public hearing portion of this meeting.
Second.
There's been
Alder
a motion
Douglas.
which has been seconded. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, I will call the roll. Alder Farrar Santana on closing the public hearing.
Yes.
Alder Douglas.
Yes.
Alder Morrison.
Yes.
Alder Marchand.
Yes.
We've lost Alder Rakeen, and I'm in favor as well. The public hearing portion of this meeting is closed.
Mr. Chair, this is Alder Marchand.
Alder Marchand.
I move the item.
there a
And
second?
that being the ADU item.
Indeed.
Second.
The item has been moved and it has been seconded. Any discussion? Calling the roll. Alder Ferrara Santana.
I'm sorry, no, I don't have any discussion items on this issue.
So voting to move the item, are you in favor?
Yes, I am.
Excellent. Alder Douglas.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, this is
Yes.
Alder Adam Marchand.
Yep,
Did you ask for discussion on the item that was moved?
I realize that I had the order reversed, so I will call for discussion. I got well ahead of myself and I apologize. So discussion on the item, which has been moved and seconded. Alder Marchand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to speak in favor of the item. I think that I heard from constituents in a couple of different meetings that I attended, including a CMT meeting. There were concerns from some of my constituents that passing this text amendment would lead to a proliferation of ADU development and a serious change to the character of my neighborhood, which is not exclusively single family unit, but has a lot of single family unit houses in it. And I can understand their concern, but I don't think that is likely. I think it will lead to more people developing ADUs on their properties. I think it'll increase the supply of units, including units that are affordable for more people, not everybody. And I think that will help address some of the concerns we've had and continue to have in New Haven about access to affordable housing options. I think it's a tremendous boon for seniors who are cash poor but house rich. This could provide an opportunity for them to stay in their houses. I really like the owner occupancy requirement. I understand that there are some who believe it's on shaky legal ground, but I was convinced by the Corporation Council's explanation of the issue at our city plan meeting. And so I feel confident recommending we approve it. The thing that I am concerned about is parking. Not concerned enough that I won't support this item, but concerned enough that I think it's worth following up on the desire of so many people, particularly in the Hill, to see more regulation and enforcement of parking in that neighborhood. We've heard from Hill neighbors on so many occasions over so many years, going back at least 20 years to my memory, well before I was on this board, about the parking crunch in the Hill. And so you're going to have more units with more people living in an area without any additional off-street parking. I can understand why people in a neighborhood with parking issues would say, wait a minute, we're dense enough already. That's not the issue I have in my neighborhood, right? And so I think we need to take seriously that issue, but I don't think we should require working class people to go before the BZA to get that relief, especially since the BZA grants that relief a lot of the time. I'm on the City Plan Commission. We hear a lot of those requests as well. We give advice to the BZA, but most of the advice we give is positive in terms of granting the relief. And I take seriously that, going to the BZA is a burden and a hardship for someone of modest means. On the other hand, it's the opportunity for the neighborhood to weigh in on a project. And so you don't want to just wipe it away willy-nilly. You want to think long and hard about it. But I feel that this legislation has been well considered. It is a modest step forward. More steps will be taken in the future. And I'm encouraging colleagues to support the item. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alder Marchand. Further discussion on the item. I recognize Alder Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am in support of this item. As a staff person in the child welfare system. This type of ordinance makes me very excited because most people don't know, but a lot of times when children unfortunately have to come into DCF care under the state, one of the biggest barriers for reunification is housing. And in the city of New Haven, as we all know, apartment costs have gone up, gone up, gone up. And with every passing day, we have more and more units, very expensive units being built in the city of New Haven, and people of less means have nowhere to go. So to see that we are in the process of passing a law, hopefully, that will allow for, as my colleague Ida Marchand said, for seniors who are pocket poor but rich in housing, to be able to convert some of those things. It's really, really going to help to change the map of child welfare, because, you know, a person should not have to be separated from their child because they don't have anywhere to live, or they can't afford it based on their income. So I am very much in support of this. The same thing as far as parking is concerned. I know that is a burden. I live in an area that's very, very dense, and parking becomes harder. But if, you know, myself, if I had to park, you know, a couple of blocks further down the way, I would, if that's going to help a family to be able to have safe housing, because we are, as alders, as a community, we're responsible for one another. And so I think that this is a really good piece of legislation. I like the fact that we're going to test it out to see how this really works. And then hopefully this will become the way. Because, you know, even before this kind of law was brought forward, this is something that was happening, as Ms. Woods showed us, has been happening for years. And I believe one of the houses that Director Woods showed was my aunt's house, who came up here in the 1950s. And she, being the oldest of her siblings from Alabama, that was the rule. My grandmother said, if you want to go up north, you could go with your sister. First, you have to show me a high school diploma. And that's how my family got here. That's how my father got here. And, you know, the rest is history. So thank you, Director Woods, and everyone who's worked with you in making this proposal. And I ask my colleagues to please support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Morrison. Further discussion on the item? I will just say briefly, I am in favor as well. I just want to say two reasons why. My first is my experience serving on the Board of Zoning Appeals for several years, where homeowners coming to get variances to be able to build accessory dwelling units, as Director Woods and as Alder Marchand have alluded to, was something that we heard a lot, and it's something that we routinely approved. But coming in front of the BZA, I think it's an extremely important step for large developments that are going to have a major impact on their neighborhoods. But it is genuinely a burden for individual homeowners, particularly those with fixed incomes or of limited means. I mean, I saw it for years, you know, some people who came and hired a lawyer at great personal expense, some people who like could not or did not want to take that step and were not able to, you know, proceed with their projects because of that. It truly is a barrier, and it's one that I think is completely unnecessary for the sort of development that we're talking about here. Now, that being said, I also do want to say that I hear the concerns about the parking, and I have to confess, I do share Director Wood's, you know, desire or goal to reduce the reliance on automobiles and cars in our city. That being said, you know, people, and I think particularly in neighborhoods like the Hill, truly for now do have to rely on their cars to commute, to get to and from work, because public transit, bike infrastructure are not up to snuff in many parts of the city. And that's a separate question. So I don't want to just sort of like say, well, we're going to wish that problem away. But that is a separate issue. My concern is, like Alderman Marchand, not so great that I don't support the item, because I have said on this committee and in this board many times and in other venues that for our affordable housing crisis in New Haven, I fundamentally I've not been convinced that just building more towers of market rate apartments alone is going to do the trick. We know that market rate often is a euphemism for luxury apartments, and that's not going to, you know, that is on its own, it's not just going to change the market such that it solves the affordable housing crisis. We need a bunch of measures. I think this is a common sense one. It's one that I'm fairly excited about. And so for those reasons, I'm in favor of this item and moving it forward favorably to the full board. Any further discussion? Seeing none, now we will vote, and I will call the roll. Alder Ferraro Santana. Alder Ferraro Santana, are you in favor of moving the item forward?
Yes, I am.
Great. Alder Douglas.
Yes.
Alder Morrison.
Yes.
Alder Marchand.
Yes.
No Alder Brackeen, and I am in favor as well. So we have moved the item forward.
Mr. Chair, this is Alder Adam Marchand.
Alder Marchand.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
There's been a motion to adjourn, which has been seconded. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none. Alder Ferraro Santana.
Yes.
Alder Douglas.
Yes.
Alder Morrison.
Yes.
Alder Marchand.
Yes.
And I'm in favor as well. Thank you, colleagues, and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.